Hello, my name's Tina Hobley and I'm an actress, and I thought we might read one of my children's favourite stories, Alice in Wonderland. Alice sat on a bench next to her elder sister, who was reading a book without pictures. Feeling rather bored, she decided to go and pick some flowers, when suddenly a white rabbit with red eyes ran past Alice. Well, there was nothing strange about this, but Alice was intrigued when she heard the rabbit mutter, "Blast, I'm going to be late." Pulling a watch out of his pocket, he looked at the time and then sped away. Alice couldn't believe her eyes. Her curiosity aroused, she began to chase the white rabbit. He was far ahead of her, and in the distance she saw him disappear down a large burrow. Without hesitating, Alice climbed into the same hole. The burrow led to a tunnel which became steeper and steeper until she was falling right down into a deep well. As she flew downwards, she saw shelves of jams and preserves and shop windows filled with cakes and sweets lining the walls of the well. Then suddenly, with a great bump, she landed on a bed of dead leaves. It was very dark down here. Alice felt her way forwards and soon reached a large, brightly lit room. In the middle of the room, there stood a three-legged table, which was bare except for a tiny key on the table. Alice was wondering what sort of tiny door must this tiny key fit, when she spied at the very bottom of the far wall a little door. The key fitted perfectly. Behind the door there was another long tunnel, but it got much too narrow for Alice to go through. She got down on all fours and saw at the end of the tunnel the most beautiful little garden she had ever seen in her life, with fountains and flowers and all the colours of the rainbow. If only I could shrink and visit that wonderful garden, thought Alice. Suddenly she went back to the little table and, to her astonishment, there on top now stood a little bottle with a label on it saying, "Drink me." Now, knowing that she should not drink from strange bottles, Alice looked the bottle over carefully to see if it said the word poison. There was nothing of the word poison. Nothing looked suspicious, so she drank from it, and it was quite delicious. Suddenly, she looked around in astonishment. "I'm getting smaller," she exclaimed, and Alice continued to shrink. Soon she was just the right size to fit through the little door, and she ran across the room as fast as her tiny legs could carry her, and was soon in the beautiful garden. Suddenly she heard footsteps. It was the white rabbit, dressed in his finest clothes and holding a fan and some white gloves. "If I make the Duchess wait any longer, she will be furious," he exclaimed. Alice, not knowing which way to go, asked the animal, "Please, Mr. Rabbit," she began. He looked at her and, dropping his belongings, bounded into the tall grass. Alice picked up the fan and the gloves. "Well, I don't want to stay here all alone," she said to herself, and she began to cry. She cried so much that soon she found herself surrounded by a sea of tears. The rabbit, who was again passing by, instead of comforting her, said to her angrily, "Well, Mary Jane, what are you waiting for? Come along now." Drying her tears, she walked towards the little white house with roses growing around the door. The roses were white, but there were three strange-looking gardeners painting them red. As she approached, Alice heard one of them say, "Be careful, Five of Clubs. You're splashing paint in my face." "Well, it's not my fault," replied Five of Clubs. "The Nine of Spades pushed me." "Gentlemen, why are you painting these roses?" asked Alice. But instead of answering her, the Five of Clubs suddenly exclaimed, "The Queen! The Queen!" And the three gardeners threw themselves flat on the ground. First the knives arrived, then the royal children, then the jokers, and then finally the King and Queen of Hearts. Looking at Alice, the Queen asked severely, "Who is this little girl?" "My name is Alice, at your service, your Majesty," replied Alice politely. "And who are you?" asked the Queen, pointing at the 3 gardeners. "How should I know? They have nothing to do with me," replied Alice, surprising herself at the rudeness of her reply. The Queen gave her a furious look and shrieked, "Off with her head!" The King whispered in her ear. "Remember, my dear, she's only a child," he said. Suddenly, Alice had a strange feeling. She was growing bigger and bigger. Very soon, she would be back to her normal size. "Off with her head!" screamed the Queen once more. "Oh, who cares about you?" retorted Alice. "You are nothing but a game of cards." And at these words, all the cards flew in the air and fell onto Alice. She uttered a little cry, tried to shake them off, and found herself lying with her head in her sister's lap.